Hi, I'm Barbara Black, and this is a supplementary video to the Pick a Petal pattern, the 2024 block of the month designed by Jen Kingwell for thequiltshow.com. The outside border is comprised of 64 fan blocks, little 4-inch fan blocks, and then two of them are put together to make 32 double fan blocks. And although the pattern won't provide this information and the instructions to make these until month 11, which is way down the road, because they are the same size as the templates that were provided in month 1's pattern, I suggested you might want to work ahead on these throughout the year. And a lot of people have decided they wanted to do that, and I started getting a lot of questions. So you can certainly just simply follow the instructions and hand piece everything the way Jen Kingwell does, or you can adapt some of these blocks, and this is one in particular that I like to do by machine. And I really found that the machine paper piecing the fan blades was much faster for me. My motto is I want the fastest method that gives me the result I want. And so for me, paper piecing the fan blades and then piecing these by machine and some by hand is the fastest way I can get these done. So I'm going to give you my information and my instructions. I do write a blog. It's bbquiltmaker.blogspot.com. And on February 2nd of this year, 2024, the blog post is the things I'm going to show you here in this video today with photos and a lot of information. So you can take a look at that as well as watch this video. So I'm going to switch us to the document camera so you can see the steps that I want to run through for you. All right. Okay, so by making this as a double unit like I ultimately decided to do, my background is just one piece of fabric. Here in this little one, I've got two different fabrics down here for the handle, but I made it as a half circle, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. You have lots of options. So as I said, you could make two of these 4.5-inch units. So you'd have a half a handle and a half a background and join them together. That works perfectly fine. You could have just one fabric here and one fabric there. You could have, if you decided you wanted all of these fabrics to be the same, the handles and the background, it would take about a yard of fabric to make that all the same. But Jen's pattern is very scrappy. That's what she did. I'm working from the kit. We have lots of background fabrics, and so mine is also very scrappy. So what I discovered as I started making these, I thought I should be working on these too. So the thing for me that was the slowest part was using the template. This is the B template to make the blades. And there are 256 blades in these 64 4-inch fans. And so for me, the slowest part was tracing around them, cutting it out, marking the little hole, the dots, and cutting out each individual little blade. One of my good friend's students, Cindy, and thank you so much, Cindy, for reminding me about this, said that she was just simply going to paper piece the blades. And so she had worked in electric quilt and put the pattern together, and she sent me the information that she had put together, and I liked it so much, and all I did was just adapt it just a little bit. And so on this one sheet of paper, we have provided this for you. It's in the month 2 patterns and documents section of the block of the month, and you must be logged in as a star member in order to get this. I added the fact that you could know for sure you've printed it to be the right size. From this finished edge to this finished edge is 2 1/4 inches, and then of course from outside edge to outside edge it's 2 3/4. Just check your pattern when you print it to make sure that it's right. You may have to adjust your printer to be certain that you got it the right size, but it is critical that these be the correct size. And it also indicates that the blog post where I've written about this is on February 2nd of this year. So you could print this onto newsprint or vellum. I don't recommend printing it on heavy-duty copy paper just because it's harder to sew through. If you want to sew through the paper, I like newsprint, vellum, or tracing paper is another alternative. But because of learning how to do paper piecing on freezer paper, which we did in the Wendy Williams Color My World block of the month quilt from 2021, I simply printed this page onto freezer paper. You can buy freezer paper like this in 8.5 by 11-inch sheets. You could take regular rolled freezer paper. Because it's on a roll, it's a little curly, so you would just lay it out on your ironing surface, lightly press it one time to flatten it, and then trim it to 8.5 by 11 so you can put it through your printer. You want to print so that the lettering, the ink is on the matte side and the wax is doesn't have the ink on it. So that's what I did, and this, as I said, this pattern we have provided to you. So if you're going to sew through the paper, the most important thing about paper piecing, if you're going to do sewing through the paper, is to lower the stitch length. I find about a 1.75 works best for me. And you want to make sure that you can easily remove the paper. And this one is done, and you can see that because I have used a small print. A lot of people tell me they hate paper piecing because they don't like all the bits of paper that's left. But just pulling this off, there's essentially no paper left. And if there's this little bit, of course, because it's on camera, it sticks in there. So that's how you do that. But I found that I preferred to do it with freezer paper. So when I said that the slowest part about this for me was cutting each of these individual little blades, when I decided I was doing paper piecing, now you're going to cut the pieces larger. So I just cut a huge number of rectangles. Remember, there's 256 of these in that outer border. And I cut them 2.5 by 3.5 or so. You might get away with it being a little shorter, but in paper piecing, a little bit larger is always better than a little too short. So you can imagine how much faster it would be to cut a bunch of these than it would be to cut a bunch of these. Okay, so here are my paper patterns in freezer paper. One of the things that we learned from Wendy's instructions in 2021 when we did the Color My World, when you're going to work with a freezer paper pattern, the first thing she tells you to do is pre-fold all of the lines. So this is just a postcard I get in the mail. I call it the sewing notions that come in the mail. I don't know why these credit card send them to me because I'm not one of their customers, but they do. And so the first thing is just take that paper pattern once you've cut it out, and I would have originally just rough cut it out for starters, and fold each of these sewing lines back. Just use it as a guide, and once you've folded it once, you've done it. You don't ever have to do it again on this pattern. So that gets you started. Now I'm ready to make the first line of sewing. With paper piecing, the first piece getting set is the most difficult, I think. So we're going to start. I've got 2 blade fabrics here that I want, and I put them down on my table, right sides together, because that's how we sew, right sides together. And I have placed this paper with fabric number 1. These blades are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. So fabric number 1 right here, and I placed it so that I can see that there's a 1/4 inch at the top, and that clearly this piece of paper is completely going to be covered by fabric. And that's what you want with paper piecing. Okay, so I've got this ready to go. I would fold this back, and again, the pre-folding helps a lot, and now I'm ready to sew. The trick is to hold it in your hand. I have pressed this in place. Now, when this paper is new, there's a good bit of this wax on the surface. It's a waxy plastic. But once it has been used many times, and I have probably made 20 of these with this one piece of paper and 20 with this one. So the wax is long gone. What I do to get it started then, to use a little bit of glue, is this is Elmer's washable school glue, disappearing. It's purple. I like the purple. And when you put it down, it'll hold it for you. Just a little light touch is all you need. Okay. So that's now ready to go to my sewing machine. And I'm just going to run that right along. This one has been sewn. And what I want to show you is that the edge of the paper is your sewing guide. You're just simply going to want to stitch so that these stitches run right exactly along the paper, not through the paper, not beyond the paper. You don't want to see fabric in between the edge of the paper and your stitching. This is just simply a guide for where you sew. So this isn't fast. You don't want to go super, super fast. You want to go, I say it's not how fast can you sew, it's how accurately can you sew. Once that's sewn, this paper has done its job for you to get this seam in the right place. So the process is sew and now flip. So I'm going to turn this over, and I have sewn this seam, and as I mentioned, because this wax is long gone, I'm just going to put a tiny little smear of that glue, just a little bit. So it's sew, flip. I'm going to open this piece, and I'm finger pressing here, getting it flat. You do want to make sure it's flat. Don't put a fold in here. If you put a fold, you're going to sew the fold. So I've got that in there like that. I turn it over, and now I'm ready to prepare this seam to come be ready. I've sewn this seam, the seam between 1 and 2. Now I need to sew the seam between 2 and 3. Using the sewing notion that comes in the mail, I put it right there again on the fold, and because it's been folded many times, it just jumps right back in place. And then I use the most valuable tool to me in paper piecing, and that's the add a quarter ruler. It has a little lip that's 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and so I have put this ruler just snugged up against the postcard and the folded back paper, and now I know exactly where to cut the piece here. Let me get my cutter going. There we go. Okay. All right. Come on. All right. That's trash. I throw that away. And now I'm ready to add the next piece. I know exactly where to place it because it's 1/4 of an inch away, and that's what we normally sew, 1/4 of an inch away. And again, you can see that it's helpful that this is oversized so that you're sure it's right. When we're working with angles like this, it can be easy to not get it right where it should be. And if you have it up here, what happens when you open it, you may not have enough fabric down here at this end. And the next time you say, oh, well, I better make sure I have enough down here. And when you open it, you don't have enough up there at the top. So when you're getting started with this, until you've gotten the hang of it, what I recommend that you do is place it where you think it goes, turn it over, and just use a fine pin, place it in there, open it up, and make sure that you're going to cover the paper completely. And I can see that this does. It's a whole lot easier to move the pin and readjust than it would be to take out the stitches. Okay, so this is now ready to sew. And so the process is sew, flip, trim, sew, flip, trim. And ultimately, you will cover this complete piece of fabric. Like here's this one. This would happen to be sewn through the paper, but the process is the same. And you'll have this all sewn together. I have made a whole bunch of these. Remember, there would be 64 of these if you're making these individual ones. So then when I decided that as I was coming up with this process and how was I going to do this, that I really did like to be able to put 2 of these together and work with a half circle of 8 blades. And then it's 1 handle here and 1 background at the top. So here is just 2 of these separate units that I have joined together. And I have a whole stack of these ready to work on some more. Okay. So you have some options. As I said, you could have all the same fabrics, or you could do separate little ones like this. But the first thing I did was I made myself little plastic templates and used a hole punch. This hole punch is really too large. It's 1/8 of an inch hole punch, and it just puts too much variation in. I strongly recommend everyone who's a star member watch the Sally Collins show, number 1602. She shows how to make perfectly accurate templates. And her recommendation is a 1/16 inch hole punch. And in my live that I did this week, someone said that Joanne sells the 1/16 inch hole punch, which was great information to know. So I did that, but then I said, well, I can do something better with this. And I decided that I was going to prep all of these with freezer paper. I needed that half circle freezer paper. So I just figured out what size it was going to need to be. I drew some lines, and this is a 3-inch circle. These are, let's talk about this for a second. All right, here's what we do. All right. This is the template that's provided. It's 1.5 inches finished. So therefore 2 of them have to be 3 inches finished. And so I just simply used my template to make I laid the line in the center here. You can flip it over and get the other line, and that showed me what size it needed to be. When I was sure it was the right size, I have in the bigger perfect circles templates that I have from Karen K. Buckley. This is a 3-inch size circle. So I just simply had my center, and I put this on a piece of paper like this, and I drew it. And this is freezer paper. Again, I like to work with freezer paper. I'm not providing this to you. I won't provide this. You just simply can draw your own. Okay. It's a 3-inch half circle. So I made that. All right. So when I get these ready to go, I can press this on the bottom. Now I have added a little more fabric down here because, as I typically try to remind you, more fabric is better. We'll have a little bit to trim at the end, but that's better than coming up too short. So I've got this here. I'm going to put just a light, very light touch of glue, and the glue that I would like to use for this is that fabric glue stick. This is Quilter Select yellow fabric glue stick. It works very well, but light. You want a light touch because eventually I want to take this paper out. And so I just use this. Let me turn this as the edge I would want. Put a little light bead of glue, and then either with your fingers or with a tool, with a stiletto, with your stitch ripper. These are wonderful applique stick tools that are great for doing a lot of this kind of turned edge on applique. And I would turn it all under. When I get it done, turned under, it looks like this. And you want to be careful because if you have pleats and puckers here, when you turn it over, you're going to have pleats and puckers here, and that's what it's going to look like. So you just work with it until get it smooth. The trick is that you don't want a really fat seam allowance because the more seam allowance you have in here, the more puckers you're going to have. This seam allowance is a little bit larger than this one, and I find that this smaller one, move it under camera, just there, a little bit better like that. So I make a bunch of these. If you want them to be made out of 2 fabrics, you could simply sew 2 squares of fabrics that are about 2.5 inches square, sew them together and press the seam open in the middle and do the same thing. Put your paper on the wrong side of that double square, and then you could make it with 2 if you wanted to. So that's just another option for how you can prep these circles. Half circles. All right. If you were making them individually, and some people will just want to do it like that, here's that same thing. As I said, I use the template, and I don't want, on my paper, I don't want the seam allowance because I want to be able to turn back fabric onto the paper. So that's just what I wanted you to see how you can do that. So this is a quarter circle out of freezer paper. This is a half circle out of freezer paper. Okay. So I got these prepped, and I got them ready to go. And then I was, the first thing I did was needle turn them under, and that's when I decided, you know what, a prepared edge would be a lot faster for me than sitting there trying to turn under what's a fairly tight curve. And I had pins in my hands, and they kept moving and things like that. So I got this ready and said, you know, I prepped all of these, and I put it on here, and I at first had the same issue with pins when I'm holding them in my hands at night to hand sew them. I said, you know what, I can do something better about that. Once I've prepped it, and I want to know where to place it. So this has me going back to the template again, the original blade template, this is B, and I want to give myself 3 dots. I want the dot at the center, the dot down here on the left side, and the dot on the right side. So I just line this up, seam allowance line, and this is a permanent marker, and I'm marking on the front side of the fabric. So I encourage you to be careful if you're going to use a permanent marker. A pencil, as long as you can see it, is a better option. I went through that hole, just that one at the center. I did the same thing over here and the same thing over here. Now I know exactly where to place this, and I folded this in half like this, so I know where the center is. And I place this at the center line there, and I want this folded edge to come right to the dot on this side, and the folded edge to come right to the dot on this side. And I went, oh, that's great. So I pinned it, and then, as I said, it shifted in my hands and everything. I went, yeah, no, glue it. So I went back again the next time, and, I try everything one time to figure out what's the fastest method that gives me the result I want. And so a little light glue, just to hold this in place. And then I was ready to hand sew it. And so that evening I hand sewed. Okay, that's fine. Now, as I'm getting these ready, I went, you know what? Since I'm prepping all of these, this would be super fast to machine applique. And so the next day I tried that. And sure enough, this one has been machine appliqued with, and there's lots of great programs on the Quilt Show on how to machine applique. You simply go to the search box and write machine applique, and many of them will come up. And so there are, you can't even see it here. I use this very fine thread. My favorite threads are the Quilter Select 80 weight pre-wound bobbins. There's every color you could possibly need. And this is just, I dare you to see where those stitches are. I'm this close and I can't see them. Here's another one that it's just very, very hard to see. So I go from this to this. And now it's time to put on the background. So let's talk about that. Okay. So if you are working from the kit fabric, those are fat 8s, and I had about 28 of these. A few of the fabrics I had used already in piecing some of the blocks, but of the white, very light neutrals that we're going to use in month 4 on the log cabin blocks, I think I used 28 of those. And so that's what I was going to use for these background blocks. Again, I'm talking about this piece up here. The template for it, that if you have the template, acrylic template, plastic acrylic templates, you have this shape. And it isn't supposed to appear in the pattern until very late in the year, but I'm working on that now. I think we're going to get that to you much faster. I'll have more information on that in the next week or so. Anyway, so what I figured out, what I wanted to do is I wanted to make this as a double, and I didn't have to make a separate template for this. I just had to use the one that I had. So from those fat 8s, and an 8 is 9 inches wide by 22, a fat 8 by 22 long, I need 32 of these. So I cut 32 of these, and I wish I could tell you I was smart enough to cut them at 5 inches, which is what I knew I should have cut it at. And this one is, in fact, yeah, this one for demo purposes is about 5 inches. But no, I cut all 32 of them at 4.5 because I knew that was the size I needed. And as soon as I cut that last one, I went, oh no, you should have cut them 5.5. So you have some extra fabric around the outside edge, as I tell you, you always need. And I won't for most of mine, and I'm really sorry I don't. So don't do what I do, what I did. Do what I tell you to do. So I have taken this rectangle. It's 9 inches by 5. Folded it in half, right sides together, so I'm going to mark on the wrong side of the fabric. Okay. Then I want to, remembering that we don't need a seam allowance in the middle. The fold is takes the place of it. Then I folded this so that I can put those dots, which are right there at the seam allowance line, on the fold. And again, I used a permanent pen so I could see it. And I just went right through those holes and put the dots there. I have 2 dots there. I have a dot here, here, and those 2 at the bottom. Okay, I do that first. Then I like to use any kind of a inexpensive mechanical pencil. Does a trick. This is my marking device of choice whenever I can see it. And I just traced around that shape on that side. And I just gave myself a quick, you can see this wasn't fully 5 inches because I don't have a full 1/4 inch up there at the top. But I get this ready to go. And then you can rotary cut this if you're really careful. Don't cut the outside. Remember, we've left that there extra. The only part you have to cut is this curve. Okay. Once you have done that, when you open it up, you have the background piece. And this one is cut the full 5 inches. And you can clearly see that. See how much extra, oops. Yeah, you can clearly see if I put it under the camera. All right. All right. So I've got the extra around the outside. I'm going to trim that when all of this is done. So that's the piece that's ready to be sewn to here. And you want to work with this piece on the top. The fan will be on the bottom and this piece will be on the top. Those little dots tell you where to align them. So I have aligned at the, I have to double check my lines to make sure I have them right. I put a pin where all the dots appear at these fan blades, and then I sew slowly around the outside edge all the way. It's not, again, it's not fast, but it's for me, it's a heck of a lot faster than it would be to hand piece the whole thing. So that gets these pieces to be sewn in place. And then when it's sewn there, it needs to be trimmed. Let's see if this is, I think this is the one that needs to be trimmed. It is, yes. And you can see that it's because I made this extra large that this needs to be trimmed. You are going to trim this to exactly 4.5 high by 8.5 wide. And so I start with my ruler and I always measure from the center out. I'm not even looking at the outside edges until I start and place the center because I want the center to be aligned in the center. So half of 8.5 is 4 1/4. I take the 4 1/4 inch mark line right here, and I put it on that center seam. And if you have a center seam down here on the bottom and you sewed it really well, it also is going to align all the way. You want to have at the edge of this fan block, the fan blade, 1/2 inch from the folded edge, that's a turned edge, remember, and it's been sewn, to this outside edge. So I've got an extra 1/4 out that I can cut away over there. And I want the same thing over here. This gray one needs to come in at the 1/2 inch so that I can, from 4 1/4 out, is going to be just what I need it to be. And at the bottom, I want to be 4 1/2. At the top, you want to be 4 1/2 inch, because the pattern is made in such a way that you have a 1/4 inch background on all of the places where it joins to the fan block. A 1/4 inch finished, and then you need a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I fiddle with this to make sure it's right. Once you cut it, you can't glue those little threads back on. So you just want to make sure that you got it right. When I'm happy with it, I use a rotary cutter. I trim up here and across the top, turn it around 180 degrees, double check it again, and make sure that I've got it right, trim this even at the bottom, and then it looks like this. So that's how I made these. I found it fairly easy to do. Certainly faster for me than everything else I had tried so far, and certainly faster than if I was cutting out all 256 of the little tiny blades like this with the template. So I am going to show you what not to do, because I often say, well, what could possibly go wrong? And there is something that could possibly go wrong, and that is when you lay the template on the wrong fold. As I did, fortunately I marked them and only cut one out when I realized what I had done. Okay, so again, remember how I showed you to do this. We put the fabric is folded in half, right sides together. I'm going to mark these dots, making sure that this fold, the dot lines are on the fold up here. This is the folded edge. Okay, cut this away, and when I open it, you saw what it looked like, what it was supposed to look like. If you lay it so that you have put, let's see if I can get this right. Yeah. If you lay it so that the fold is over here, what not to do. I hesitate to even show you this because someone's going to see it and say, oh, I should do it like that. No, here's what you get. And I don't know what that is, but it is not the shape that you need. This is the shape you need. That is not. And what happened with that is that I marked it, again, as I said, I placed this all the places it should be, but I put the long edge on the fold. You want to put the short, tiny edge on the fold. Okay, so that's a tip. Fortunately, I had marked these and only cut the first one when I realized what I had done wrong. Then I had to go ahead and remark them all. So don't do that. All right, I think that gives you plenty of information. I'll go back to the webcam. Try it if you like it. Nothing, nothing ventured, nothing gained. It is great. I'm so glad that Cindy reminded me about the paper piecing of the blades, because that alone saved a lot of time. So anyway, be looking for more tips. And as I said, I think we're going to be able to get you this template shape here pretty soon. I'm working with the folks to let's make that happen. So, okay, until next time, that's a wrap.